Well, good morning, everyone. It is 11:01 Eastern Standard Time on the East Coast, and I want to welcome you to our summer speaker series. This is the second one in our series, and we're excited to be back again today. My name is Tanya Diddy, and I'm the Vice President of Field Operations here at Concerned Women for America. And again, we're just delighted that you would join us, take time out of your schedule to hear some important words on national sovereignty. One of the purposes of our summer speaker series is to spotlight one of CWA's core issues. And again, today we're going to be focusing on national sovereignty. And we have two wonderful guests with us, experts in this field, and we're just delighted to have them. So now I'm going to hand it over to my colleague, Shay Garrison, who is the Vice President for International Affairs at Concerned Women for America. Dr. Garrison, I will hand it over to you to introduce our guests. Thank you.
Muted.
Yes.
Okay.
Perfect.
Okay, there we go. Thank you, Tanya. And I was just saying, I wish I had a cool background too, like Tanya does. I want to introduce the topic very briefly and then introduce you to our guests today. I'm very excited to have them. As Tanya said, national sovereignty is one of CWA's 7 core issues. The topic today we want to focus on under that is Brexit and talk about national sovereignty in the context of why Brexit is good not only for the UK but also for the US. In January of this year, as many of you know, the UK did leave the European Union, severing ties to the world's largest trading bloc after 25 years. And embarking on what the New York Times described as an uncertain future as a mid-sized economy off the coast of Europe. Brexit is now in the 6th month of an 11-month transition period. However, our guests and the Heritage Foundation called Brexit a victory for sovereignty, economic freedom, and self-determination. Well, in the same way, we at CWA believe that no international organization should have authority over our country in any area. Just to remind you what we focus on, we believe in a strong national defense and our right to protect and secure our national borders. We also believe in economic freedom for our country, ability to participate in free markets, support private enterprise, small and limited government, and budget restraint in which the US spends within its means. I am really looking forward this morning to hearing from our guests about why Brexit is good for Britain, Europe, and America, and why the defense of national sovereignty is vital for our future and for the entire free world. It's actually quite exciting to hear from both of these gentlemen because they are 2 of the foremost specialists in this field. Dr. Niall Gardner and Stephen Groves, who I'm sure also have very interesting personal stories to share, and I wouldn't mind hearing about those. Let me tell you a little bit about their background. To tell you everything about their background would take up the whole time, so I'm going to shorten it. Dr. Gardner is director of the Margaret Thatcher Center for Freedom at the Heritage Foundation. And he is a leading authority on Brexit, US-British relations, US foreign policy, and many other things. Before joining Heritage, he actually served as a foreign policy aide to Lady Margaret Thatcher in her private office in London, and he assisted her with her final book, Statecraft: Strategies for a Changing World, where he advised her on a number of international issues. So his work for Lady Thatcher helped shape her foreign policy vision, including her powerful call for Britain to consider leaving the EU, which laid the foundation for Brexit over 10 years later. And he has multiple degrees, quite intimidating actually, including several masters and a PhD in history and modern history from both Yale and Oxford universities. And you can see him regularly on Fox News, Fox Business Network, CNN, BBC, and he's a regular contributor for London Daily Telegraph. Stephen Groves, who I'm very honored is also able to join us today, is the new Margaret Thatcher Fellow in the Margaret Thatcher Center for Freedom at Heritage. And he joins Dr. Gardner, as I said, in today's discussion. Mr. Groves previously was the Bernard and Barbara Lomas Fellow at Heritage for 10 years and then left to become the Chief of Staff for Nikki Haley, the Ambassador to the UN. Then he moved to the White House to become Special Assistant to the President and Assistant Special Counsel. He most recently served as Deputy Press Secretary in the White House. So now he's back at Heritage, focusing on the defense of US national sovereignty, international treaty issues, and he's overseeing the transnational terrorism portfolio. One thing I'd like for you to maybe during questions, Steve, is talk about your establishment of the Sovereignty Network at Heritage. It's a network of policy analysts, advocates, academics, and activists that mobilize and combat efforts by transnational progressives to erode US national sovereignty. And your work also on this led to the creation of the Congressional Sovereignty Caucus, which I did not realize. You can also see Steve on Fox News, CNN, BBC, NBC, ABC, CNBC, and I'm sure many others. He has a Master's of Laws from Georgetown, a Juris Doctorate from Ohio Northern University's College of Law, and also a history degree from Florida State. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Niall and Steve. Thank you very much for being here.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Shay, for that very kind, generous introduction. And it's a tremendous pleasure to be here this morning. Concerned Women for America is a wonderful organization that really stands up for American leadership, and it's the kind of organization that my former boss Margaret Thatcher would dearly have loved to have spoken to. So. And I think the work that you do really is incredibly important at such a key moment in US history. So please keep up the great work that you do, and we look forward to a lot of collaboration between the Heritage Foundation and Concerned Women for America. And as Shay mentioned earlier, Brexit is the key topic of discussion this morning within the broader context of national sovereignty. And Brexit is incredibly important, not only for the United Kingdom, but also for the United States and for the entire free world as well. And Margaret Thatcher was the first British politician to talk about Britain leaving the European Union. This was actually back in 2002 in her final book, Statesman, where she wrote that the UK should seek a renegotiation with the European Union. And if the UK did not get what it wanted in terms of those renegotiations, then the British should leave the EU. And so, as always, Margaret Thatcher was many, many years, if not decades ahead of her time. And it's important to bear in mind that the UK actually joined what was then the European Economic Community back in 1973, so nearly 50 years ago. The UK signed up to the European Union institutions, basically. And at that time, the European Economic Community was really just a trading bloc. It evolved into a supranational state. And the European Union today is nothing like the European Economic Community of 1973. And so the EU has evolved into a big government monstrosity in many respects. And nation states within the European Union no longer have control of their borders, of their trade. They do not have full control of their courts. In the case of Great Britain, about 73% of British laws were actually generated in Brussels. And in June 2016, the British people finally had a vote on their membership of the European Union. And 17.4 million Britons voted to leave the EU in a historic referendum. And the Brexit vote in 2016 was incredibly important because this was a battle between conservatives who were fighting for national sovereignty and self-determination against the political elites, including not only, of course, at that time, the British government headed by David Cameron, but also, of course, the likes of Barack Obama in the United States, who warned Britain against leaving the European Union. You had the IMF, the World Bank, practically every major international institution warning Britain against leaving the EU. But the British people said that their sovereignty and freedom was so incredibly important that they would at any cost leave the European Union. That's exactly what they did. And on January 31st this year, the British people finally left the EU under the leadership of Boris Johnson, who won a landslide election victory last December. And the British people are now in the process of fully retaking control of their country, retaking control of their borders. At the end of this year, the UK will have full control over its own trade. And at the moment, the UK is negotiating a free trade agreement with the United States and with countries across the world, from India to Australia to Canada and New Zealand. And I think Great Britain will be a great force for freedom and liberty, a great force for economic freedom as well on the international stage in the Brexit era. And so Brexit is really all about individual liberty. It's all about the right as well of nation states to decide their own destiny on the international stage. And Brexit also will result in a far stronger US-UK special relationship. And the United States and Great Britain really are at the beating heart of the free world. And so Brexit will draw America and Britain closer together. And so Brexit should be welcomed by all Americans as a great event that will strengthen the wonderful partnership between the US and the UK, but also as a great moment in the advance of freedom and liberty on the world stage. And the British people are finally throwing off the shackle of the European Union, and once again being a truly free sovereign nation. Because if you're a member of the European Union, you're not a truly free country at all. And I expect that Brexit as well will be a massive game changer for the whole of Europe. This is just the beginning, actually, of the fight for freedom in Europe today. And the British people have said to the EU, they do not wish to be tied down by a foreign government based in Brussels. They do not want to be tied down by foreign courts in the European Union. The British people want to have the freedom to make their own decisions, to shape their own destiny as a truly free nation. And so I do hope that all Americans will embrace Brexit, what it signifies, what it represents, and a bright new future for Great Britain and for the US-UK special relationship on the world. I'm going to hand over now to my colleague Stephen Gross, who has just rejoined Heritage from the White House. So welcome back home, Steve.
Thanks, Niall. And thanks to Tanya and Shay for inviting Niall and myself to speak with y'all this morning. As Niall said, CWA is such a crucial organization. I've worked with them closely on issues here in Washington for years and years, particularly the so-called CWA treaty, the international community's effort to put together a women's rights treaty. And I look forward to working with CWA in the future on those issues, which really could come to reality if the current administration doesn't stay in place. The current administration is such a champion for protecting American sovereignty that there really hasn't been a great deal of need to activate the sovereignty network that Shay referred to in her introduction, or to mobilize the Congressional Sovereignty Caucus. That could all change in the event that the current administration is replaced. Because make no doubt about it, the part of the Democratic agenda is to embrace this international construct, to embrace things like the European Union. And as Niall mentioned, the former president was critical of Britain trying to leave the European Union. You see, in the United States, we had the wisdom of our founders to avoid such things as the European Union and joining it when early on our founding fathers talked about being very skeptical of getting involved in entangling foreign alliances. So we have avoided that for many, many years, but of course, we haven't avoided it altogether. We are members of international organizations like the United Nations. We have joined treaties, including human rights treaties, where the supranational committees and bodies that manage those treaties attempt to impose their particular view of human rights on the American people and go so far as to recommend that we amend the Constitution or amend federal law or enact new federal law to live up to their expectations. Now, this is exactly what the UK faced as being part of the EU. And as Niall mentioned, imagine having a decision from the highest court in your land, let's say in the UK, only to have that legal decision made by the highest judges in your own country reversed by an international court sitting in Brussels and in Belgium. There's the European Court of Human Rights, and from time to time they would tell the United Kingdom that they've decided something wrong, and that if you're going to be a member in good standing in the European Union, you're going to have to reverse your own Supreme Court and live with their decision, particularly on issues relating to human rights. You can imagine how well that would go over in this country if a decision from the U.S. Supreme Court, whether you agree with that decision or not, was somehow reversed and nullified by an international court sitting in Ottawa, Canada, or Mexico City, if the United States was part of some type of supranational union like the EU. So, I was skeptical that it would ever happen, but amazed when the referenda happened and the vote happened, and it looks like Brexit's really going to happen in the UK. So kudos to our cousins across the water. Now, we have to be careful as conservatives not to be painted with the broad brush that the liberals want to paint us with, that we are kind of one, New World Order skeptics or black helicopter types, and are opposed to all international organizations in all their forms, no matter what. It's just not the case. There are, international organizations that are useful and do not really erode our sovereignty. Things like organizations that you may have never even heard of, like the International Maritime Organization, that helps set rules regarding ships passing on the high seas and how we get through narrow straits. There's a similar organization dealing with civil aviation. If there's a way to have an organization to create structures and rules to avoid, mid-air collisions, that's a good thing. That's an international organization that we can, be behind 100% as conservatives. But those really are the exceptions. The rule are things like, the United Nations, the International Criminal Court, which has recently announced that it's going to be pursuing war crimes investigations against American servicemen in Afghanistan. Other treaties like the UN Law of the Sea Treaty, and then of course human rights conventions. And I'll move into just the last part of my remarks here to note the one that CWA and Heritage have worked closely together on, and that's the CEDAW Convention, the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women. Real mouthful. Something that we would all be in favor of. We want to eliminate all forms of discrimination against women. But when you put the people in Geneva in charge of it, you get directions to other countries, such as, make sure that, abortion is available for all women, and that doctors should be required to perform it regardless of their objections, their religious objections. They passed down things like being skeptical of Mother's Day. Years ago, the CWA committee in Geneva told Belarus that they should consider getting rid of Mother's Day because it was a stereotype of women, and a harmful stereotype, that we should celebrate the role that women play as mothers. And these are some of the more ridiculous examples of what happens when you kind of submit yourself to one of these treaties and are supposed to follow all of the recommendations made by the treaty bodies in order to be considered in good standing. So I'll wrap up there. Lots of ground to cover, but the bottom line is the question that we always have to ask ourselves is who decides? Who decides what U.S. policy is going to be, what our norms are going to be, what our court cases should be, and what our federal laws and regulations should be. We can decide that people in Geneva have a better idea about how to run our country than we do, but I doubt that anyone on this call would agree with that. So with that, allow me to pass it back to Shay or Tanya and answer whatever questions the group may have. And again, thank you for inviting us here today.
Thank you very much, Steve and Niall. I want to kick off some questions for both of you, and I'll let you decide who answers this. I'm going to steer a little bit differently from what I was planning on asking, which was about trade. But while you were talking, especially Steve, I was thinking about CWA. We very much strive to articulate a clear message to people of what we believe and why we believe it. So how would you both articulate a message of why Brexit was important, why national sovereignty is important to people? And I'm thinking about my own experiences that come to you and say, but globalization, that's the thing. We have to collaborate with other countries. What you're talking about is isolationism, or you don't want to partner, you're not open to other countries. What would you say to them?
You're on mute, Niall.
Niall, you're on mute.
Yes. This is Tanya. Niall, I will unmute you. Just give me a second. Steve, if you want to maybe take that, and then I will get Niall unmuted. I apologize for this.
Oh, sure. Yeah, when you talk in such broad terms, it is difficult to make the case, which is why the Sovereignty Network and Sovereignty Caucus were kind of envisioned, because sovereignty is a gauzy concept. And if you have people saying, oh, no, you're an isolationist, and it's just ridiculously wrong. All of the facts state otherwise. You mentioned trade. We're involved in all manner of multilateral and bilateral trade agreements. We're involved in many international organizations that do not take away our sovereignty. And what you should reply to these folks, and this is as true for the things I was talking about as they are for Niall's discussion of Brexit, is, whether you want to decide to make your own laws here versus have those laws imposed upon you from abroad. That's the fundamental decision. And if you get someone who says, oh, well, I wouldn't mind if the EU imposed laws on us, or a bunch of experts on a panel in Geneva, dictated what our domestic policy should be relating to civil rights and human rights and women's rights. If they say that, then it's going to take quite a bit of education for them to see our side of things, because they're fundamentally thinking that the United States is not a sovereign country, and we should cede our sovereignty and not fight for it. Niall?
Yes, excellent points there, Steve. And just to add to what Steve has said on the issue of trade, so at Heritage, we believe very strongly in the principles of free trade. We believe the free trade advances economic prosperity across the world. And one of the things that Brexit does actually is it allows Britain to actually negotiate its own free trade agreements. So previously, as a member of the European Union's customs union, the UK was not allowed actually to make its own trade deals. So all of the trade negotiations before for the UK were handled by bureaucrats, unelected bureaucrats sitting in Brussels. And so Britain had no say over European Union trading policy or trade deals in effect. And so now, as a result of Brexit, the UK is able to advance trade deals not only with the United States, but with countries all over the world. And Britain will return once again to being a great free trading nation. And for several hundred years before the UK joined the European Economic Community, Great Britain was this great free trading country. And the tremendous success of the United Kingdom over the course of the last several hundred years, at one time, of course, Great Britain was the world's superpower up until World War II. And that was very heavily based upon Britain's free trading policies and the UK's drive to advance trade all over the world. So Britain is moving back, I think, into being a great free trading power. That's very good news for the United States, because the US-UK trade deal, as President Trump has said on many occasions, will be great for America. It will be terrific in terms of building extra additional jobs here in the United States. It's a great job creator for Americans. It's not going to take away jobs for Americans. It's going to build jobs for the American people. And so a US-UK trade deal will be a reality, I think, within the next year. And that's going to be a tremendous event, actually, for both Great Britain and for the United States.
Mm-hmm. What I hear, a theme running through both of what you're saying is freedom, really. Independence to make your own decisions and freedom. And something Steve said that was very interesting is that if people do not understand or the importance of having that freedom, I'm paraphrasing Steve, you have to go back and explain. And that is actually one of the things we've been doing recently for our young YWA girls, Young Women for America with socialism, because when you talk to people in that age group, a lot of times they don't understand the importance of freedom. That's another discussion. Tanya, I'm going to hand it back to you because I believe you have some questions from our field.
Thank you, Shay. And again, thank you for this wonderful presentation. We had one that came in, actually, Niall, we talked about this yesterday, and so we're going to kind of maybe transition to something that wasn't on your topic, but that there's a parallel going on in both of our countries.
Yes.
And it has a lot of our attention, particularly if you live in the Washington, D.C. area, and that is the issue of the statues. And, you know, the movement to want to remove statues. And you said this is happening in Britain as well, and would love for you just to talk briefly on that and what you see the parallels are in the country, between the two countries.
Yes, well, thank you, Tanya. That's a terrific question, a very relevant question to what's happening right now on both sides of the Atlantic. And, you know, as I mentioned earlier in the presentation, I think this is really a key moment in not just British history, but also American history as well. And what we are seeing on both sides of the Atlantic is an attempt by the far left to destroy our heritage, to destroy our culture, to tear down our statues. And the socialists, or even communists in some respects, who are trying to tear down statues of Washington, of Lincoln, of Teddy Roosevelt, Andrew Jackson, and in the UK, they're trying to tear down Winston Churchill, for example. Some of them are threatening Margaret Thatcher's statues. They're threatening to tear down many of the great figures, actually, in Britain's illustrious past. And we are dealing here with frankly, a mob. We're dealing with an attempted revolution by people who do not believe at all in the principles of democracy and freedom and liberty. And they wish to tear down even the great founding fathers of the United States who built and created this wonderful nation. And so in many ways, this is a war to defend our own civilization, to defend Western civilization. And the far left will stop at nothing here. If they get away with bringing down statues of Lincoln and Churchill, the next thing they'll be targeting private property as well, because these rioters, so-called protesters who are attacking statues, they do not even believe in private property. They believe in the destruction of the capitalist system. They believe in the establishment of a far left socialist, even communist order. And so we have to stand and fight as conservatives against what is happening. We have to defend our institutions, defend our heritage, our culture, and we have to defend the heroes of our past. Because if we don't, we will allow the left to prevail, and it will be a truly frightening world that we will live in if the violent left is able to assert some kind of authority and control. So we have to stand up right now. We have to fight to defend everything that we believe in. We have to defend our civilization, our history, our culture, and all of the values that we believe in. And my former boss, Margaret Thatcher, who very sadly passed away several years ago in 2013, if she were alive today, she would be fighting tooth and nail against this left-wing mob. She confronted many left-wing mobs when she was prime minister, and she always won. And she would never, ever give in or be defeated by the far left who seek to destroy everything that we stand for and believe in. So I very much hope that the spirit of Margaret Thatcher can be with us in standing for the defense of the free world. So thank you very much for your question, Tanya.
Thank you. And I want to thank you both, Niall and Steve, for being with us today. That as we wrap up our session with you, I learned a tremendous amount and took a lot of notes. And really, Steve, to your point in talking about the treaties, I have worked and lobbied with CWA on those treaties, and they just all came back and were very familiar. And it's an honor and really a privilege to really work alongside Heritage on these very important issues. And the knowledge and the expertise that you bring to the table, we are really grateful for. So I want to thank all of you on behalf of Concerned Women for America for being with us today. And we hope that you will join us on our future summer speaker series. And we hope that you have a wonderful day. Thank you again, Steve and Niall, and all that attended today.
Thank you, Tanya.
Thank you, Steve and Niall.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.